Hello and welcome to the Green Canary. Today on the show, we're going to be speaking about life in the wake of the catastrophic floods in New South Wales and Queensland. We've actually got a Lismore resident who's going to speak to us about her ordeal, and it was quite an ordeal, I assure you. Now, we're also going to be speaking about a thing called eco-grief, which is very, very much related to what our Lismore resident went through. And wouldn't you know, it's like the footy, it's on each week. There is yet another Mike Cannon-Brookes venture. Love it. And there's much, much more. All on the Green Canary today. I'm Ant Sharwood. I'm sitting opposite Elfie Scott as usual. How are you, Elfie?
I'm good, thank you, Ant. How are you going this week?
I'm going very well, thank you. I'm a little bit drenched right now because I've just run from a train station through a Sydney downpour. Been a bit of rain around lately, but obviously I'm not as drenched as a lot of people are up and down the east coast of Australia.
Yeah.
And as mentioned, we are going to be speaking to a woman called Eddie Lloyd who lived through the floods in Lismore, but only just.
Yeah. See, I think it's been a week of a lot of various government figures pointing the finger at each other about disaster aid, and they've been dominating headlines. So because of that, we've just thought it was really important to speak to a Lismore local who's been on the ground, who knows the extent of the loss and what communities like hers need looking forward.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, Eddie Lloyd really does know. She's been a counsellor. She's a lawyer. She's an active member of the community, but she's also just a regular citizen. She's a mum. She's a partner. She's a flood victim, very much so. And she wrote, she's also a climate activist, you know, and she wrote a piece in The Guardian this week, an op-ed, and I just thought it was a terrific story. And we're going to talk to her about that, but just let me read you one or two lines. I mean, she wrote, "We were lucky we didn't die."
God.
And she wrote, "We drive through Lismore's central business district. It looks as though it's been bombed. It resembles a post-apocalyptic horror film."
It's so harrowing.
It was a mess there in Lismore, and it's still a mess 2 weeks on. So let's catch up with Eddie and see how she's feeling 2 weeks on. Eddie Lloyd, Lismore resident. How are you going 2 weeks after the worst floods on record?
Oh, is it 2 weeks? It feels like yesterday still, honestly. Like, it doesn't feel like, that's a shock to hear that. Is it really that long ago? I've had COVID and my partner's got COVID as well. So we've stayed away from everybody. So might have been a bit of a protective factor in terms of the trauma that I'm seeing on my friends' social pages at the moment, because the cleanup is still going on. There's just waste everywhere. Everyone's scrambling to get grants. People are putting up their fundraiser pages to try and get some money, because we've just been completely abandoned. You know, all of these announcements about all this money that we can get. At the end of the day, you can't access it. You can't get the state grant. If you earn over $1,000 a week, you can't afford insurance because it's $30,000 a year. So people are just left high and not dry. My friend, she's just had to send her son to Brisbane to family. Like, families are being split up all over the place because there's such a housing crisis now. There was before, it's even more so now. So people are really traumatised and trying to pick up the pieces of this shattered community.
One of the most compelling aspects of that very powerful first-person piece that you wrote for The Guardian was about the stench. In journalism, it's always tempting as an interviewer, from my perspective, to ask people, what did you see? But sometimes it's the other senses that cut through to readers, the sound of something, the smell of something. Tell us a bit about that smell, and has it subsided at all, like the waters?
It is everywhere. I actually wanted to include a scratch and sniff on that op-ed so people could scratch and really understand how foul it is. And now I'm at my place and we're doing all my partner's washing, clothing, sheets, everything. You wash it once in hot water and it's still revolting. Like, the mud smell is traumatic. It stinks. It's like, it smells like death and diesel and just rotting meat. And it is just everywhere you go. Every time you wash up something, the smell's there, and it just makes you want to vomit. So it's very traumatic. The smell is still very much there and will be for a long time. And yes, yeah.
How are people getting on with life? There must be an unbelievably difficult combination of being helpless, being unable to resume normal life activities. For example, your son's school is closed, People's workplaces have been washed away or made unusable. How are you getting on with life, you and the community?
I can't even think about work at the moment. All the courts are shut here. They've just been flooded, and, people aren't even thinking about work at the moment. Like no one can work. Everyone is just trying to replace and repair and rebuild and clean. So that side of life is going to take a long time for people to, get back to normal again, I think. Everyone is really just putting one muddy foot in front of another at the moment, just trying to get through every day. And now we've got COVID that's hitting a lot of us now. That's an added challenge for everyone. It's going to be a very, very long recovery, and there's absolutely no certainty that we will recover. That is the greatest fear in Lismore at the moment, is that we're not going to get adequate financial assistance to rebuild. Families are going to get split up. There's no housing here. Everyone's really, really frightened that this is going to be the end to Lismore, which would be a real shame, because if you know anything about Lismore, we are and I'm really starting to hate the word resilient. We really are a resilient, sustainable community. We want a circular economy here. We want to manage our own waste. We want to, we really do walk that reuse, reduce, recycle mantra here in Lismore. And we've got a lot to show the rest of the nation in terms of resilience in these climate change events. But unfortunately, our community has borne the brunt of it, maybe the biggest brunt in terms of human cost so far in Australia. And that's really devastating. And I'm just really disappointed in our politicians. And, this could be a great opportunity for them to use us as an example of how to build a community that can adapt to the changing climate, and how to fund communities from the prism of climate change, and not from this political election cycle prism that we see funding, coming to certain electorates and not others. So, yeah.
What would that look like, that funding? I mean, you and the people of Lismore are dealing with micro and macro issues at the same time here. The micro issue being your town has been devastated. The macro issue being climate change is undoubtedly making these sort of events more frequent and more severe. So you're fighting a fight to get action on climate and also action at the local or micro level on your town. How are you balancing both of those things?
Well, we're at the mercy of 3-year election cycles here. We all know that it's going to cost so much more doing nothing in an ever-changing climate. But the politicians are just interested in winning the next election in 3 years. So we're not getting that long-term assistance that we need, that this country really needs to be looking at, in terms of preparing for the greatest existential crisis ever to face humanity. Like, literally, this is about our human race surviving right now. And what is the biggest tragedy for me is that climate change is a political issue. It's about our survival, and it's so political. It should not be, and that's really, really frightening. That's really frightening.
What would you like the politicians to say?
We are in a climate emergency, and we need to end the fossil fuel industry, and we need to prepare our communities and build them to be able to withstand some of these climate events that are coming to everybody's doorstep, not just Lismore. It's going to come to the Prime Minister's doorstep eventually.
Wow. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot to unpack, isn't there?
Such a deeply impactful interview. Thank you so much for bringing that to us.
Oh, well, it was a pleasure. And thank you, Eddie Lloyd, for speaking to the Green Canary. It seems to me that there are 4 main emotions there if you unpack it very, very quickly. Actually, first, speaking to her after we stopped the recording, first emotion is compassion. She wants to help the local community. She is helping the local community. Mm-hmm. She set up a page. Just Google North Lismore Flood Appeal. That is run by Eddie Lloyd and others in North Lismore, which is the worst hit part of town.
That's not a Peter Dutton one?
Always is. No, it's not. So if you want to give your money straight to locals, Google North Lismore Flood Appeal. So, Eddie Lloyd, feeling four emotions. One, that was compassion. Two, she's feeling angry. She's feeling angry at climate inaction and against about all sorts of stuff that's preventing Lismore from recovering as quickly as it might. She's feeling fear for the future. What comes next for her town? That's a very natural emotion. And she's also feeling grief. And this sort of came through again in some of the conversation that we didn't record. But she did mention that a member of her family's experiencing PTSD, which is very, very common in these sorts of events. And I think the fact that she actually mentioned the word grief is really, really interesting. And it takes us to our next story, doesn't it? Because we spoke in the intro about a story that I want you to tell me all about that you read in the 9 newspapers this week about eco-grief. What's eco-grief, Elfie?
Yeah, so this was quite a tough read in the Sydney Morning Herald, but it's from Laura Chung and Mary Ward. And basically it has several different accounts of people to demonstrate what eco-grief is. And basically what they're talking about are the feelings of anxiety and depression that we get from looking at the world around us collapsing and these ecosystems that we love so much falling apart. And I have been passionate about this topic for many, many years. It's something that I really enjoy reading about because I think that there are basically 2 big components to eco-grief and eco-psychology in general. And one of those is watching the environments that you love fall apart around you in real time. But then there's another big one, which is fear for the future. And I think that is absolutely something that Eddie touched on later in that interview. And I'm sure you'll be able to hear the full audio through the newsletter. But yeah, I think that it's such an important topic. And to some extent, I really think that it's absurd that this hasn't entered our national dialogue in a more prominent way, especially when it comes to politicians. I just think that it's such a rational response from people to worry about the future, worry about their children's future. And the fact that government hasn't spoken about this is really quite baffling and sad to me.
It's a good point you make. It's not even that government hasn't spoken about it, but that it's not really part of the lexicon.
Yeah.
It's not really part of the way we think about our relationship to the environment and the natural world. But why isn't it like a grief? If a forest was there yesterday and it's not there today, if a species was there yesterday and it's not there or it's endangered today, we're about to speak about an endangered species, a newly endangered one, why wouldn't I feel that as grief, as a loss for something that is in the world but is no longer there?
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting topic. But I tell you what, one of our other favourite topics here on the Green Canary is Mike Cannon-Brookes. We love doers, don't we? I mean,
we can't stop talking about Mike Cannon-Brookes.
Look, these people are going to save the world. I mean, they are our superheroes in capes, the billionaire activists, as they're sometimes called. And
I hope so.
Well, these are the people that are going to actually enact the change that it becomes impossible to argue against, and they're going to replace old industries with new. They're going to make economic sense. They're going to make environmental sense. What's he doing this week?
All right. So this week, MCB, as we've liked to call him for the past couple of weeks, has teamed up with Andrew Twiggy Forrest to raise major capital for Sun Cable, which is planning on building the world's largest solar and battery storage facility in the NT. So they've now raised, I think it's something like $200 million for this project, which is called the Australia-Asia Power Link. And that's going to supply power to Darwin as well as export power to Singapore and Asian markets through this massive undersea cable. I don't know what those look like, and if you want to explain that infrastructure to me, that would be
really.
great.
I'm not an undersea cable expert. I did just look at the Sun Cable website and notice that it goes undersea to the island of Java in Indonesia. Somehow it pops over Java and pops under the sea again and pops out at Singapore and will contribute enormously to Singapore's energy overall mix. So great big solar farm in the middle of the NT desert. Dispatch that up to Darwin, big battery in Darwin. Hasn't happened yet, but with Twiggy and MCB, you're talking about 2 billionaire activists now. This is the sort of thing that is very likely to happen, so it's a piece of good news this week.
Yeah, totally. All right, so now we are going to talk about mulch, which are the little clippings, the little stories that we like to bring to each other for curiosity's sake. And What do you have for me?
This is not curiosity. This is sadness. This is what I just This is what I just alluded to. This is a newly endangered species, and not just any species, Elfie. We have celebrated the gang cockatoo on this podcast before. I love the squeaky gate sound of the gang cockatoo, and Magic Morgan, who lurks in the darkness behind us, is going to play that now, aren't you, Morgs?
Door, you're absolutely right. And you know what? As soon as you told me about that, I started telling everybody who I know in the ACT, I'm like, listen to the squeaky door.
Have you heard one yourself yet?
No, I haven't.
You will. You'll wake up one morning. I know you go down to the south coast of New South Wales quite a lot, and you hear them down there as well.
Oh,
Anywhere where there's trees, they need old growth trees, and they need trees that aren't burnt by massive, biggest in a generation bushfires.
Right.
That keeps wrecking their habitat. That is why their numbers are dropping. That is why Federal Environment Minister Susan Lee just chucked them on the endangered species list, which is not good, but in some ways, sometimes these things can help because at least we're keeping a close eye on old squeaky gang, perhaps a closer eye than we were before.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Our next story is a column from Professor Alan Duffy. So you've probably seen him on TV, quite a good looking fella. He is an astronomer, and he wrote this call to action this week, which I just thought was really interesting and something that I hadn't really thought about before. But basically, he's telling people to recycle phones and laptops because he's saying they're a treasure trove of rare and precious metals. So you and I were speaking about cobalt mining the other week, right? So we were talking about like the lack of ethics around cobalt mining. But he's saying, there are 4.2 million broken phones lying around in homes and businesses, and 95% of each phone can be recycled, including the glass, the batteries, and, importantly, the cobalt.
Yes, and I mean, I love the opening line of Alan Duffy's column. It says, our mobile phones are a treasure trove of rare and precious metals, from the cobalt and the lithium batteries to the gold and the palladium in the circuitry. Our mobile phones are a treasure trove of rare and precious metals. Imagine if you had an actual treasure trove at home of rare and precious metals. You wouldn't just leave it in the fourth drawer of some cupboard you never open.
That's exactly what I've done. I've got like 4 phones in my fourth drawer.
And you've got a crush on a good-looking astronomer, but...
don't say that. I bloody don't.
I think you would be...
I'm just saying objectively.
You would be the Kate Blanchett to Leo DiCaprio's astronomer in Don't Look Up. I think that's who you are, Elfie.
Oh, God, I don't even know if that's a compliment. Okay, we're moving on.
Okay.
All right, so our last story is a study that was published in a journal called Marine Pollution Bulletin, and it's found that octopuses are making use of sea litter. So this is research that has basically found that octopuses are hiding inside bottles and cans, and they're using things like old batteries and bottle tops to hide under or carry around with them while they walk around for protection. And this is an interesting one. Ant and I were debating beforehand, is this a good news story or a bad news story? And we're going to say it's grim, but it is at least a little bit interesting.
Well,
I don't know.
Octopuses have sort of become a meme, haven't they, in the environmental sphere? Like every week it seems like we find out something terrific and new and smart and lovable about octopuses, and the fact that they're using our throwaway bloody junk and they've gone, you know what, humanity? You're stuffing up the oceans, but I'm going to make use of that and work with it the best I can. It's not a good news story. It does make octopuses more lovable. I don't know what to say.
Look, at least we have the UN Plastics Treaty now. Well, coming.
It's coming.
Yes.
It's coming. And at least no one said octopi because the correct plural is octopuses.
Yeah, if you say octopi, Ant will come around and slap you.
Platypi as well. Not happy about that.
All right. So that is all we have time for in this episode today. Before we head off, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're recording, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We'd like to pay our respect to their elders past, present and emerging, as well as extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today.
Very nicely said, as always, Elfie. And I'd just like to say to everybody out there, please sign up to our newsletter. It comes out on a Wednesday. I work very hard on it, making all of what's in the pod and a whole lot more readable in your inbox. Just email hello@thegreencanary.co, just .co. And also say hello to us on social media. We like to be chatty. We're at Green Canary Pod on Twitter. We're at Green Canary Media on Instagram. And we're at this studio this time next week, aren't we, Elfie?
Nicely done, Ant. All right, we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.